If you've ever pondered which political stance is more hawkish regarding U.S. foreign policy, you're not alone. This question has intrigued many, prompting us to delve into the data to understand which political side might be better or worse for global affairs. This video aims to shed light on the extent of death and destruction the United States has caused over a little over a century, covering major wars, proxy conflicts, coups, and other interventions that have wreaked havoc throughout different communities. Welcome back to Mind Polish. Now, who initiated these major wars, coups, and interventions, and who continued them? Starting with the Banana Wars in 1898 lasting until 1934, a series of military interventions in Central America and the Caribbean, primarily to protect U.S. commercial interests. The Philippine-American War in 1899 to 1902, the U.S. fought to suppress Filipino resistance to American rule following the Spanish-American War. This was under William McKinley, who was a Republican. In 1915, the U.S. military occupied Haiti to stabilize the country and protect American interests, led by Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat. This persisted in Haiti until 1934. U.S. forces also occupied the Dominican Republic to maintain order and protect American interests. World War I, which spanned from 1914 to 1918, had the U.S. intervene in 1917. The United States' involvement in this global conflict was initiated by President Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat. Wilson's decision to enter the war came after a series of provocations from Germany, including unrestricted submarine warfare that threatened American ships and the infamous Zimmermann telegram. This telegram revealed Germany's proposal for a military alliance with Mexico against the United States, compelling Wilson to act decisively. Right after World War I, Woodrow Wilson got the U.S. involved in intervening in the Russian Civil War, supporting anti-Bolshevik forces. The U.S. provided economic and material support to China in its fight against Japanese aggression. This included financial aid and the sale of military supplies in 1937 before it got involved in World War II. America imposed economic sanctions on Japan, including an oil embargo in 1941, which significantly strained Japan's war efforts and was a factor leading to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Then World War II started, which spanned from 1941 to 1945. The United States entered this devastating conflict under the leadership of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a Democrat. The catalyst for America's involvement was the surprise Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Following Roosevelt's death, his successor, Harry S. Truman, also a Democrat, oversaw the war's conclusion, including the genocidal decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which killed up to 200,000 people. Then World War II. In the immediate aftermath, the United States shifted its focus to containing the spread of communism. From 1946 to 1949, under the Truman Doctrine, a Democrat, America supported the Greek government against communist insurgents. This policy marked the beginning of the U.S.'s global strategy of containment during the Cold War, providing military and economic assistance to Greece to thwart the rise of communism. The Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953, was initiated by President Harry S. Truman. Remarkably, after guiding the nation through the end of World War II, Truman found himself leading America into yet another significant conflict. His successor, Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower, continued the war efforts but worked diligently toward ending the hostilities, ultimately facilitating an armistice. Amidst these major wars, the United States also engaged in various covert operations and coups. In 1953, Eisenhower's administration orchestrated a coup in Iran, followed by another in Guatemala in 1954, further demonstrating the U.S.'s interventionist policies during this era. The Vietnam War, spanning from 1955 to 1975, had its roots in the policies of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who initiated U.S. involvement by financing and arming South Vietnam. While Eisenhower didn't start the full-scale war, significant escalation occurred under Democrat Lyndon B. Johnson. President John F. Kennedy, also a Democrat, increased troop presence in Vietnam, and after his assassination, Johnson escalated the conflict further, transforming it into a full-scale war. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. under Richard Nixon, a Republican, conducted extensive bombing campaigns in Cambodia and Laos as well to disrupt North Vietnamese supply lines in 1969, which continued until the end of the war with Vietnam. Republican President Richard Nixon sought to end the Vietnam War, but despite his efforts, the conflict persisted until the Paris Peace Accords in 1973. Following this, President Gerald Ford, a Republican, oversaw the war's final stages, culminating in the fall of Saigon in April 1975, which marked the end of the war and the unification of Vietnam under communist control. Also during the Vietnam War era, the United States conducted a military intervention in Lebanon in 1958. This operation, known as Operation Blue Bat, was initiated under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a Republican. The intervention aimed to support the Lebanese government during a political crisis and prevent the spread of regional instability influenced by rising Arab nationalism and potential communist influence. The U.S. deployed approximately 14,000 troops to Lebanon to stabilize the situation and support the Lebanese government, ensuring the protection of American citizens and interests in the region. The intervention concluded without significant conflict, as U.S. forces withdrew later that year after helping to restore order. During Kennedy's tenure, another significant event was the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. This ill-fated operation, initiated and quickly concluded under Kennedy, aimed to overthrow Cuba's communist government but ended in failure. In 1965, President Johnson intervened in the Dominican Republic, justifying the action as necessary to protect American citizens and prevent the spread of communism in the Western Hemisphere. The 1973 destabilization of Chile was initiated by President Nixon. This intervention involved economic sanctions, funding opposition groups, and supporting strikes and protests against the government of President Salvador Allende. After Republican Gerald Ford took office following the Vietnam War, the United States became involved in the Angolan Civil War, which lasted from 1975 until 2002. The U.S. supported the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, rebels against the Soviet and Cuban-backed Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, government. This involvement spanned multiple administrations, continuing through covert operations and support under Presidents Jimmy Carter, a Democrat, Ronald Reagan, a Republican, George H.W. Bush, a Republican, and Bill Clinton, a Democrat. During the Angolan Civil War, the United States also engaged in another significant conflict, the Afghan Mujahideen War against the Soviet Union from 1979 to 1989. Under President Jimmy Carter, through Operation Cyclone, the U.S. supported Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan, providing funding, arms, and training. This support expanded significantly under Reagan and is often cited as a key factor in the eventual Soviet withdrawal. During the Afghan War, the United States also provided covert support to Iraq during its war with Iran, which lasted from 1980 to 1988. Under President Ronald Reagan, a Republican, this support included intelligence sharing, logistical assistance, and material aid to bolster Iraq's efforts against Iran. This was part of a broader strategy to counter Iranian influence in the region following the 1979 Iranian Revolution, despite Iraq's authoritarian regime under Saddam Hussein. The support aimed to maintain a balance of power in the Middle East and prevent any single nation from dominating the region. The United States also became involved in the Nicaraguan Contra War from 1981 to 1990, right after the Afghan-Soviet War. Under President Reagan, significant support was provided to the Contras, a rebel group fighting against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. This support included covert funding and military aid, leading to the controversial Iran-Contra affair. The Reagan administration's efforts were continued by George H.W. Bush. As the Vietnam War came to an end, the United States quickly became embroiled in another conflict, this time in Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War in 1982. Ostensibly aimed at stabilizing the region, some viewed this intervention as an attempt to install favorable governments. Initiated by President Ronald Reagan, a Republican, this mission lasted until 1984. Concurrently, Reagan authorized the invasion of Grenada in 1983 to overthrow the Marxist government after a coup. Both operations in Lebanon and Grenada were brief but significant in human loss and destruction. Following these interventions, the U.S. launched Operation Just Cause in Panama in 1989, under President George H.W. Bush, a Republican. This operation aimed to depose Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega, who was accused of drug trafficking and undermining democracy. Soon after, Bush led the nation into the Gulf War from 1990 to 1991, marking the beginning of U.S. military involvement in the Middle East's oil-rich regions. In 1992, U.S. forces were deployed in Somalia as part of a humanitarian mission that evolved into military engagement, most notably marked by the Battle of Mogadishu under George H.W. Bush, a Republican. In the same period, the U.S. also played a significant role in the Bosnian War, which also began in 1992 and lasted until 1995. Under Bush and continuing with President Bill Clinton, a Democrat, the United States supported the Bosnian government forces against Serbian forces. Clinton's administration was instrumental in the NATO intervention and the negotiation of the Dayton Accords, which ultimately ended the war. In between the Bosnian War, the Haiti intervention was initiated by Bill Clinton, in Operation Uphold Democracy, which aimed to restore the elected President Jean-Bertrand Aristide to power after a military coup. In 1998, the U.S. led NATO forces in a military intervention against Yugoslavia to halt the ethnic cleansing of Albanians in Kosovo. This campaign, involving extensive airstrikes, resulted in the withdrawal of Yugoslav forces from Kosovo and lasted until 1999, less than a decade after the previous major conflict. The war in Afghanistan began in 2001 following the September 11th attacks. Most of the investigations saying it was an inside job, being a demolition, justified the U.S. military presence there. Initiated by President George W. Bush, a Republican, this war saw a surge in troop levels under Barack Obama, a Democrat, who implemented a strategy aimed at stabilizing the region. The conflict continued under Donald Trump, a Republican, who negotiated a withdrawal agreement with the Taliban. Finally, Joe Biden, a Democrat, oversaw the complete withdrawal of U.S. troops. Amid the ongoing conflict in Afghanistan, President George W. Bush also initiated the Iraq War in 2003. This war extended until 2011, when President Barack Obama orchestrated the withdrawal of U.S. troops, allowing a renewed focus on the situation in Afghanistan. In 2011, Barack Obama, a Democrat, authorized a military intervention in Libya by NATO's. This operation involved launching airstrikes against Gaddafi's forces, dismantling Libya's air defense systems, and enforcing a no-fly zone as mandated by a United Nations resolution. The swift intervention was largely driven by Libya's adversarial stance towards the West. The Syrian intervention began in 2014 under President Barack Obama, a Democrat, with the goal of supporting forces opposed to President Bashar al-Assad. This effort included combating ISIS, which was portrayed globally as an Islamic terrorist organization. The intervention continued under President Donald Trump, a Republican, who initially reduced U.S. troop numbers but maintained a strategic presence. President Joe Biden, a Democrat, has also maintained U.S. involvement, supporting Kurdish forces against the Assad regime. Simultaneously, the conflict in Ukraine began in 2014, also during Obama's presidency, following NATO's expansion efforts, which included considering Ukraine's membership, a move long opposed by Russia. This conflict saw a relative slowdown during Trump's tenure but reignited under Biden, who increased military and economic support for Ukraine amid ongoing tensions with Russia. The U.S. has backed the Ukrainian government against Russian-backed separatists and the annexation of Crimea, providing significant military aid and imposing economic sanctions on Russia. The intervention in Yemen, which began in 2015 during Obama's presidency, involved U.S. support for the Saudi-led coalition against Houthi rebels. This support continued under Trump and has been reassessed by Biden, who has sought to end U.S. backing for offensive operations in Yemen. Most recently, one of the most controversial interventions has been the U.S. support under President Joe Biden for the Israeli military actions in Gaza in October 2023. Following a breakout from Gaza, often described as an open-air prison, Israeli forces initiated the Hannibal Directive. This policy allowed soldiers to prevent the capture of their comrades at any cost, even if it meant endangering civilians and their own forces. On October 7th, this led to the deaths of over 600 Israeli settlers during the Palestinian breakout. Initial reports indicated a death toll of 1,400 Israelis. Despite these reports, the narrative that Hamas was responsible for all the deaths, including claims of heinous acts such as beheading and raping, spread widely, though these claims lacked substantial evidence. This situation escalated with the U.S. providing military support to Israel, including advanced military equipment and 2,000-pound bombs. This support has enabled severe military actions in Gaza. As a result, Israel has intensified its military operations, leading to a catastrophic death toll and widespread destruction. As of the creation of this video, the official death toll stands at over 41,000, though some estimates suggest the number could be as high as 200,000 due to many bodies being unaccounted for under the rubble. Since 2005, Gaza has been under a severe blockade, which has tightened further since the recent conflict. This has resulted in a humanitarian crisis, with 2.2 million Palestinians living in dire conditions, lacking basic necessities like food and water. The ongoing U.S. support for Israel, which has been a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy since 1948, has played a significant role in the current situation, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, earning Biden, a Democrat, the nickname Genocide Joe. This is the end of our review of who is more deadly, a Democrat or a Republican. As you can see, the entire history of the U.S. in the past 120 years or so has been nothing short of terrorizing. From world wars and proxy conflicts to coups and interventions, both parties have played significant roles in shaping global affairs, often with devastating consequences. In this review, the data shows that the Democrats initiated 6 wars, engaged in 5 proxy wars, conducted 11 interventions, and orchestrated 4 coups. On the other hand, the Republicans initiated 5 wars, participated in 4 proxy wars, carried out 8 interventions, and led 3 coups. This brings the total to 26 significant events under Democratic leadership and 20 under Republican leadership. These events resulted in approximately 630,000 American troop casualties and upwards of 87 million foreign casualties, including civilians, aid workers, and reporters under Democratic administrations. In comparison, Republican-led interventions resulted in around 250,000 American troop casualties and 10 million foreign casualties that also include civilians, aid workers, and reporters. Both figures are staggering, but the grim reality suggests that Democratic administrations have been involved in larger, more devastating conflicts. Just look at why they call Biden Genocide Joe. Although the truth is both parties are viewed as warmongering terrorists who are corrupt and continuously fuel the war machine, corporate greed, and Zionist aspirations, that which pays U.S. politicians handsomely, Americans have started to wake up to the reality of the complicit and corrupt government. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you found this video informative and thought-provoking, please don't forget to like it as it helps us a lot to reach more curious people like you. Also consider subscribing to our channel if you would like to get more content like this. Share this video with others to spread awareness, and leave a comment below with your thoughts or questions. We would love to know what you think. Let us know if we missed something. Until next time on Mind Polish.